Okay, so we're on Zechariah chapter 9. And the book of Zechariah is broken up into sections. So you have the first 6 chapters where the series of visions that Zechariah has seemingly all in one night. And it spoke about a variety of different events that was going to happen to Israel and ultimately going to happen to the whole world. God wanted the people in Israel to get their priorities straight. Stop focusing on the things of yourself, the things of your day. Look to the future, look to the Messiah. And then there was some folks in the next few chapters, chapter 7 and 8, where they wanted to ask God, what do we do about our man-made holidays, our man-made fast days? Should we be doing it? And what should we do? And is it something that pleases you? And of course, God asks, well, not what is your holiday? He says, what is your motivation? What is it? Why do you do what you do? He never actually answers their question directly. He simply tells them, check yourself. Why are you doing what you do? Are you doing it to praise me? Or are you doing it to praise yourself? If it's for you, do it for you. But if you're doing it for me, do it for me. Live for me. Do the things I ask of you, right? So now we get to these visions here, which are a good while later, probably much later in Zechariah's life, at least some years later, right? Years have gone by. The temple is no longer the main focus as it was in the early chapters, as it was in Haggai as well. This is now, we're beyond all that. These are some prophecies regarding what's going to happen to Israel in the near future, and then also what's going to happen in the far future. You're actually going to see some back-to-back verses that talk about the coming king, and it's going to have some contradictory statements. One that sounds like he's coming in peace and in meekness and in humbleness, and another one, it sounds like he's coming in conquering and in power and in overwhelming force. Turns out they're both true, separated by so far about 2,000 years, right? So Zechariah, what empire did he live during? Do you guys remember which empire was still in power at the point when Zechariah started his ministry? Persia. Who was it? Persia, exactly. And what is the next empire that overthrows Persia? What's the one that follows? Well, the Medo-Persian Empire. And then the other group, though, who was it? Greeks, right? Under, yeah, the next one after the Persians. Would be the Greek Empire under which leader? Alexander the Great. So Zechariah, he's now going to look way beyond their time, starting with the near term with Alexander's conquering, all the way to the long term. He's going to see a survey of everything that's going to happen, and that's going to include first coming and second coming. So that takes us down to chapter 9, verse 1. This is the judgment on the enemies of Israel. So he starts out in chapter 9, verse 1. It says, the burden of the word of the Lord in the land of Hadrach and Damascus shall be the rest thereof, when the eyes of man, as of all the tribes of Israel, shall be towards the Lord. So there's a city called Hadrach, and this is a city that is nearby in Syria. It's near to Damascus, okay? It's not far from Damascus. And it was one of the enemies of the Assyrian Empire way back in 700 BC, according to history. Under the Persian Empire, it was one of the Persians' major strongholds. They had actually used it and they had occupied it. It was one of their strong cities, but ultimately it would fall under Alexander the Great. It's interesting, when we read through these first few verses, it's going to list a number of cities, and they're listed in the exact order that Alexander would conquer, right? So Alexander, as he moves, everyone in the world is watching him. Everyone's watching his career. The Persians are terrified. They went at him with overwhelming numbers, yet they were losing every battle. 300 men held off his entire army for a long period of time, way longer than they should have. And there's actually a big time history story about these 300 men, right? There's even a movie, I think, made. I don't know if it was any good or not, but it was like the whole idea is how they defended this one pass against the overwhelming power of the Persian Empire. They were much better trained. Exactly. So when the army of Alexander moves, Daniel had a vision of them moving and their feet didn't touch the ground. That's how rapidly they conquered. So as they came, what did people do? They looked to God, because nothing can stop this force that's coming. And on top of that, he's going to be coming to Israel, and he is angry with Israel. Alexander wants tribute from Israel, and they refuse. So he has every intention of leveling Jerusalem. So it's a scary time for Israel at that time. So we get to verse 2, it says, and Hamath shall also shall border thereby, Tyrus and Zidon, though it be very wise. So Hamath was the city in Upper Syria, and later it's renamed Antioch, right? Under Antiochus Epiphanes. And actually the other name for it is Epiphania, okay? So we have Antioch and we have Epiphania, two different cities, all named after Antiochus Epiphanes. So this region, okay, there was a battle in Southeast Asia Minor, which is kind of like the Turkey type area, right? And that was in 333 BC. That's called the Battle of Issus, Issus. And that's where Darius and the Persians were coming, as you talked about, to crush the Greeks, to destroy Leonidas, to finally attack and overthrow the Greek growing empire, right? This little threat that's showing up. And these were the first regions to fall, the ones we're talking about, under Alexander's great conquest. This is when everyone knew Persia's done. We got a new kid on the block, the new bully in town. So then you get to verse 3. It says, and Tyrus did build herself a stronghold, and heaped up silver as the dust, and fine gold as the mire of the streets. Behold, the Lord will cast her out, and he will smite her power in the sea, and she shall be devoured with fire. This is an interesting passage, okay? So Tyre was a city that was very materialistic. Think of it of the Vegas of the old times, right? Whatever there is for pleasure, whatever there is for power, come to Tyre. It's the city to do it, right? It was filled with silver and gold and had this, it has a prince that we read about in Ezekiel 28, right? And this prince, he actually reflects the pride of Satan, talking about all the things he's going to do. I will do this and I will do that and I will do that, right? So the name Tyre actually means citadel or fortress, place of power, place of refuge. The Assyrians tried to conquer this city for 5 years and couldn't break it down. So every empire would come and go, and Tyre would just stand without a problem until the Babylonians came, okay? Babylonians showed up and Nebuchadnezzar was there. Now, before I get right to that story, we know in Ezekiel 26, it actually talks about how the city of Tyre was going to be completely flattened to the ground and cast into the sea. Well, a couple of hundred years before Alexander, the Babylonian Empire shows up. And remember, Nebuchadnezzar was a brilliant general. He was a master of the siege. He knew how to siege a city and to take it over. So he actually besieges Tyre for 13 years, trying to conquer it. And finally, after 13 years, he knocks the wall down and is able to enter the city. And guess what he finds when he gets there? Absolutely nothing. It's empty and all the stuff's gone. And he's like, what on earth happened? Well, it turns out that the people of Tyre had slowly, little by little, or during the time of that siege, been evacuating a few people at a time and carrying out their stuff over the course of months and years. And they would go out and they would transport it to this island out in the sea, which he hadn't conquered. So they went out a half a mile out in the sea and rebuilt their entire city while Nebuchadnezzar is trying to knock down the old city. So he puts all this effort and everything. Well, Nebuchadnezzar is so angry. Guess what he does? He orders the entire city flattened to the ground. He wants it leveled, just like the Bible predicted that it would happen. And Tyre was literally cast into the sea. The city moved, right? Well, Alexander shows up and the city's just laughing. It's like, what? We're half a mile out here. What can you do to us? But God here predicted that Alexander would crush it. So how does he do it? They're half a mile out in the sea. Well, he actually goes and he gets all these slaves that he had in the region that he had, as he conquered these areas. He took all these prisoners of war, these people that he enslaved, and he had them take up the rubble of the original city of Tyre and push it into the ocean, creating a land bridge, right? Creating a causeway or whatever you want to call it. That then, guess what? It went all the way to the island city of Tyre. And it talks about how he lifts up a shield, and the Bible actually gives all this prophecy in detail, how they would come and they would attack it using a shield and using a buckler against them. He uses this massive shield and gets across and conquers it within 7 months. Now that's pretty impressive. He created all these siege weapons and did all this. He actually also used navies. He didn't have his own navy. So every place he conquered, he'd appropriate their navy and created a navy much bigger than anyone else's just by getting a couple ships here, a couple ships there. Really, he's a amazing general. I mean, really amazing when it comes to the art of war, right?
Oh, I got a question for you. You might know this. Has the island disappeared?
So the island is still there. The location where Tyre was is a prime location for a city. Has its own abundant water source, but no one has ever rebuilt there.
Cast their nets there.
Because they will cast their nets there. They dredge their nets there. No one has ever rebuilt Tyre, just as the Bible prophesied, the original Tyre, right? There are some places in that area that renamed the city as the same name, but the original location of it, even though it's prime location, no one has ever rebuilt it.
The island's still there.
I believe so. I'd have to look it up to be sure. I'd have to look it up. And in the Bible said it will be scraped flat, and the fishermen will just use that area to scrape their nets, to get all the junk out of their nets, right? Turns out the Bible means what it says. And whenever he talks about it, you can take it to the bank. Now, yes, there are things that we take spiritually, but whenever he talks about things, literal prophecies, guess what? They're fulfilled literally. So then we get to verse 5. It says, so Ashkelon shall see it and fear, and Gaza also shall see it and be very sorrowful. And Ekron for her expectation shall be ashamed. And the king shall perish from Gaza, and Ashkelon shall not be inhabited. So Alexander the Great, he conquers the lands of the Philistines in no time. I mean, the Philistines have been a thorn in the side of Israel. Here comes this guy, conquers them like that. In Gaza, the entire region held out for less than 5 months. I mean, he is extremely rapid in conquering things where Nebuchadnezzar, the great general, took years to do the same, right? So the king in that area, by the way, was dragged until he died. The king of that area was a terrible thing, right? And over 10,000 people from the land of the Philistines were sold into slavery, or excuse me, were killed, and the rest were sold into slavery. It was a very, very tough time. And he says in verse 6, and a bastard shall dwell in Ashdod, and I will cut off the pride of the Philistines. So there will not be a single true Philistine left in the land of Gaza. They were cut off as part of God's judgment for their years of oppression of Israel, dating way back to even before Goliath, right? We know that the Philistines were always this problem for them. So now today, when we talk about Gaza, we know it's occupied by the Palestinians, which is a common, it's a word that means Philistines, but they're not genetically the Philistines of the Old Testament, right? So all the cities, all these things were conquered in the order that Alexander conquered. They're listed in that order. So then we get to verse 7. It says, and I will take away his blood out of his mouth, and his abominations between his teeth. But he that remaineth, even he shall be for our God, and he shall be as a governor in Judah, and Ekron as a Jebusite. Well, that's interesting. What is that talking about? Well, remember, the Philistines were the bad guys, right? They were the bad guys in the story pretty much up until this time. But here, these great enemies of Israel, they would all be removed, and that land, Gaza, would become part of Israel. This was a prophecy that Zechariah tells us that they're going to come in just like the Jebusites. The Jebusites, they had their own land. They occupied Jerusalem. They were the ones who ran in there. Well, what happened? Israel didn't conquer them. They just assimilated them. They made them into Jews. And all of these other areas would also be assimilated into Israel. So today, even though there's largely non-Jewish portions of Israel, we know that Gaza is within the borders of Israel, the Golan Heights within the borders of Israel. And what do they benefit? They still benefit from the same things that the government provides for the citizens of Israel are also provided for the citizens of these regions. They're all, and one day when the Messiah comes back, they'll be reincorporated into the nation of Israel and be accepted in the nation of Israel. Even these people who turn and accept Jesus, right? Doesn't mean all of them. There'll be many who reject him and turn against Israel, but for those who accept. So then we get to verse 8, but wait a minute. Remember, got to keep in mind, this Alexander, he's coming to crush Jerusalem. It's on his crosshairs. Okay, and we'll talk about that in a second. So we get to verse 8. He says, and I, so God is speaking through Zechariah, and I will encamp about my house because of the army, because of him that passeth by, and because of him that returneth. and no oppressor shall pass through them anymore. For now have I seen with mine eyes. So Zechariah tells us that when Alexander's coming to conquer, God said, I'm going to park myself in front of Jerusalem. I'm going to make sure that he doesn't come this way. Okay. So according to Josephus, right, the historian that did a lot of the Jewish history that we have, Alexander defeated the Persian army and was conquering the empire of the Persians piece by piece. He demanded from the high priest of Israel, he says, give me tribute, send me money that you normally would have paid to the Persians. You got to send it to me so I don't crush you. But the high priest, he was still loyal to Darius. And he said, no, we won't send it, right? We was still hoping that maybe Darius would somehow have victory over Alexander. Well, after Alexander said, listen, as soon as I'm done with the Philistines, with Gaza and with Tyre, I'm coming for Jerusalem. Well, after it was clear that there was no help coming from Darius or the Persians, we now have the high priest of Israel. He actually tells the people to offer sacrifices to God and to pray. He says, go and pray because only God can save us now, right? He then goes out and he marches in the full high priest attire, right? That formal outfit that we read about back in Exodus. And he marches out with a copy of the prophecies of Daniel, right? And he marches out to meet Alexander. When Alexander sees him coming, right? He's like, I had a dream about this. Alexander was given a dream that the high priest would come and meet him about this, right? He had this dream and he said, this must be from God. So what does he do? He then is shown by the high priest the prophecies in Daniel about him, about his victory, about how he's going to succeed, how his army is going to cross the whole world very quickly, right? And I think it's Daniel 7 and 8, you'll find that in. And the guy is so touched. Alexander's so impressed. He leaves Jerusalem alone, and he even offers a lamb for his own sins. He actually offers a sacrifice to say, give this to your God for my own sins. Doesn't mean he was saved, right? It simply means that he was so touched by the fact that this God would directly, one, detail his career, and two, actually protect this city from them and actually send him a dream to let him know, you're not to touch this place. And he was so impressed by it, he didn't want to mess with this God. That's the one. I mean, by the way, Alexander didn't back down from a fight, but the only place he did not take over and destroy, who was it? Jerusalem. That's amazing. Yeah. That is an act of God. So he passed by, just like he says that I'm gonna camp down my house because of the army, because of him that passes by. He's just going to pass by. And when he returns, and when he passes by, he's not going to mess with you guys. Just like the verse said, that's exactly what happened. Now, there are other oppressors that would come by. Of course, we know the Romans weren't too nice, right? We know that led to the Maccabean revolt, which we talk about a little bit here. But there's also going to be an oppressor that's going to come into the yet future, who's going to oppress the people of Israel. What's his title? Who's the one that's going to oppress the people of Israel? The Antichrist. He's going to unite all nations, as a matter of fact, against Israel, against the people. And of course, his whole career will come to an end when Jesus again comes and blocks the way to his people, just like Jesus did here, as we read in Zechariah. So then that leads us to the coming king of Jerusalem. We just heard about the coming king of Greece. Let's look at the coming king of Zion in verse 9. Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, thy king cometh unto thee. He is just and having salvation, lowly and riding upon an ass, and upon a colt, the foal of an ass. What a contrast from the previous verse. What a contrast from this terrifying Alexander the Great. Here we have Alexander, by the way, he had a very well-known black stallion, right? Eucephalus or something like that. Eucephalus, something like that. But that's how a king usually rides in. When you expect a king to come in, right? You expect a procession, you expect power, you expect a battle stallion, right? But the king that rides in Jerusalem, he's not riding a stallion. Why? Because he's not coming to conquer, at least not first time around, right? He's not coming to conquer. He's coming in peace. When you ride on a donkey, donkeys don't run too fast. They can go a long distance. They don't run too fast. Because when you come on a donkey, you don't plan on running and you don't plan on attacking. You come in peace. And he tells him, you're lowly. He's coming, he's lowly and he's vulnerable. If you come on a donkey and somebody wants to attack you, you can't get away. So he's lowly, he's vulnerable. He comes in peace. And by the way, think of how Jesus presented. Did he come? Was he born in a palace? Born in a manger. Was he given rich parents and a very good name? No. Did his mom have a great reputation? No. Was his dad have some authority? No, he was a carpenter. Did he have some name that really sounded amazing? No, he was given the name Joshua or Yeshua, which is the most common name of the time. He was just an ordinary. Matter of fact, I would argue there was nothing attractive that would draw you to him. Right? There's nothing about him that would make you say, wow, I want to go to that guy. Right? All about him. He was to be approachable. Nobody can say, he doesn't know what it's like for me. No, he became just like you. He was tempted just like you. He suffered just like you. He lost friends. He lost loved ones. As far as we know, his father died. His friends died. He was tortured. He felt whatever pain you feel, he felt it. So he knows he is approachable. He can relate. But we also know that one day he is going to come riding a stallion, right? But for this day, the day of grace that we get to enjoy right now, he came in, and that day started when he rode in on a donkey, just as he said he would. Was it symbolic that he was going to ride in on a donkey and on the colt of a donkey? Or did he literally do it? That's pretty interesting. He literally did it. And what's interesting even more about it, if you go to Daniel 9:25, he said there's going to be 69 weeks of years, or 69 weeks, and we understand that to be weeks of years, from the time that there's a decree to rebuild the temple happens to the day that the Messiah rides in on a donkey. So if you actually do the calculations, and there are people much smarter than me that did the calculations, based on 360-day years, which is what the ancient calendars used, right? The exact day, that's 173,880 days from the decree until the day that Jesus rode in. And can you guess exactly what day that was? That was the exact day he walked in. The decree was given March 14th, 445 BC, and Jesus specifically walked in exactly 173,880 days later. What's interesting is that is not just the only time that he allows himself to be called king, right? Every other time, the people had tried to make him king. Remember when he fed the 5,000? They said, come on, let's make him king. He wouldn't let him. He disappeared. They tried to make him king by force. No, he just disappeared from their midst. So did he have a problem being called king? No, he was the king. But he had to make it happen symbolically or literally, as it was prophesied. Had to be done literally. There was a specific time that it was appointed for. That's the time when it was appointed. That's the time it was prophesied. And that is the exact date that it's going to happen. Does God mean what he says? You betcha. He means exactly what he says. So he specifically, whenever he's arranging this, he actually sends his apostles. He tells them to go into the town. You're going to find this donkey. If anyone asks you, you're going to see the donkey and its kid right beside it. You grab him. If anyone asks, say the Lord needs it. He arranged it perfectly because he wants you to know you can trust the prophecies of the Bible. You don't have to explain them away, like so many people are desperate to do. I don't get it. I really, honestly don't get it. The first coming was all just as written. It was surprising. Nobody really expected a virgin to get pregnant and have a kid. Nobody expected him, all these things that happened for him to be from Nazareth, to be called a Nazarene, to be born in Bethlehem, but to be out of Egypt. Yet somehow he arranged all of it. We can trust the word of God. So again, on top of all that, what did Jesus tell them in Luke 19:43? He says that your house will be left unto you desolate. Why? Why is it that Israel's going to be dispersed? Why is it they're going to suffer so much affliction and so many problems between the first coming and the second coming of Christ? He says, because you rejected the king, but specifically, he says, because you did not know the day of your visitation. I gave you the exact day, so you wouldn't even have to question who your Messiah is. But you didn't know. You didn't pay attention to prophecy. You didn't pay attention to the prophecies I gave you. And guess what? You're going to have to pay for ignoring the word of God.
That includes the Pharisees
Who should have known. And every time someone asked, where's he going to be? Oh, he's coming from Bethlehem. They knew the town, but nobody said, let me go with these wise men to see who this guy is. Remember Daniel. Why was Daniel given the prophecy? Why was he the guy that gave the prophet, that was given the prophecy? He was a friend of God. Why? Because he believed God. He believed that oh goodness, I can't even think of the name, the Babylonian exile. He knew that it was coming to an end because he believed the prophecies of Jeremiah. And he believed that when he said 70 years, what did he think that meant? 70 years. It's a very reliable book that we have in front of us. It's a very reliable book. What are you doing with the prophecies of God now? Are you taking them seriously? When you look at the Bible, are you taking it seriously? I hope so. I hope we all are. And I hope that's why, that's why we're here, to study prophecy. You get to verse 10. It says, and I will cut off the chariot of Ephraim and the horse from Jerusalem, and the battle bow shall be cut off, and he shall speak peace unto the heathen, and his dominion shall be from sea even to sea, and from the river even to the ends of the earth.
So a 2,000 year skip.
Well, a 2,000 year skip, but let me ask you a question. The last few verses we can agree were literal. We know that he rode in on the donkey. Is this too literal? Is there a time coming where Israel will exist with no weapons of war, yet the heathen will continue to exist on the earth? This isn't after judgment day. This isn't heaven. This is not heaven. There are still heathen here. These aren't just the church and the people of Israel. This is a time which we refer to as what? The millennial reign, right? There is a time where Israel has no need of weapons, no need of an army, because God is their protector. Jesus is reigning with them. He will be their defense. Has that happened historically? Has Israel lived in peace yet? Clearly not. We even this morning, earlier today, we're talking about war potentially coming to the Middle East, specifically between Israel and Iran and other places. But he's going to disarm the entire world, and he's going to make them beat their swords into plowshares. Exactly. So then we get to verse 11. It says, as for thee also, by the blood of thy covenant, I have sent forth thy prisoners out of the pit wherein is no water. Turn you to the stronghold, you prisoners of hope. Even today do I declare that I will render double unto thee. When I have bent Judah for me, filled the bow with Ephraim, and raised up thy sons, O Zion, against thy sons, O Greece, and made thee as the sword of a mighty man. So God, whenever he chose Israel, he made a covenant with Abraham, right? He said, I'm going to bless the world through you. Then he made a covenant with Moses at Mount Sinai. He says, you will be my people, and I'll be your God. He told him, I have a purpose for you. If you'll just follow my laws, I'll make it happen. If you don't, you're going to pay the price, but I will still fulfill my end. Because some of those covenants were unconditional. So he says that you feel like you're in a pit without water, you're stuck in the bottom of a pit, you're going to die. No, you come out. I'm going to take you out of that pit with no water. You can go to the stronghold. I'm going to restore you from your dungeon and put you in a place of safety and security. So not only would they be restored, remember, Israel is called the firstborn of God. He says, I'm going to appoint you a double portion. When Jesus comes to reign over the earth, the verse told us just from a minute ago, he will reign from sea to sea. But Israel was where his capital will be. They will be a special people with a special relationship. The church will be there, absolutely. We will all be, the Gentiles will be there. But when we talk about Israel, Israel will have their promises fulfilled. Promises that, in my opinion, are not extended to the church. Yes, we are grafted into Israel, but God has a specific purpose and destiny for Israel and a specific purpose and destiny for the church. He talks about his flocks, right? Now, whenever he talks specifically, he talks about when I bent Judah for me, filled the bow with Ephraim. Remember, the kingdom of Israel, different from the kingdom of Judah, had been dispersed and gone. The kingdom of Judah was all that was left. But here he tells you that that bow of Judah is filled with all of Ephraim as well. I've talked numerous times in our studies about how there is no such 10 lost tribes. They are all accounted for within the borders of Judah. All of those who worshiped God came to Jerusalem to worship God. So they're all represented here, and it's going to be filled. And whenever he specifically talks about how he references how he raised up the sons of Zion against the sons of Greece, that's a direct reference to the Maccabean revolt, right? Whenever you had this wicked ruler, this Antiochus Epiphanes, this terrible ruler who loved killing Jews. That was his great joy, was killing the Jews. He killed as many as he could. He actually took pig blood and splattered it all over the temple just to profane it. He loved to make their lives miserable. He was essentially the Hitler of their times. Well, these five brothers, the Maccabees, they actually got up and were able to bring a movement up, and they overthrew him. That's the Maccabean revolt. And that's what we talk about. Here's the prophecy even talking about how successful they would be. And that would be a picture of the overthrow of the Antichrist, right? That'd be a picture of the one who would come and put the abomination of desolation, which for those of you who aren't familiar, that's where you see a image put into the Holy of Holies to profane it. And Jesus even talks that it's coming soon, sometime after the time of Christ. So that was something after Antiochus Epiphanes. So there's yet a future abomination of desolation.
Did not Antiochus also put a statue
Of Zeus in there, exactly. Okay, so then that takes us to the final few verses of the chapter. He says in verse 9, 14 to 17, talking about how God will save his people. He says, and the Lord shall be seen over them. Is that, again, our prophecies so far? These are prophecies that are not simply symbolic. We could argue, well, God is seen over us. He dwells within us spiritually. But we also see that regarding when God overthrows the enemies of Israel, says the Lord shall be seen over them, which goes right along to the book of Revelation, where it says the whole world will see Jesus. They'll all see him, just like lightning flashes in the book of Matthew. Lightning flashes from the east to the west. So shall be the coming of the Son of Man. Everyone's going to see him. And his arrow shall go forth as the lightning. And the Lord God shall blow the trumpet and shall go with whirlwinds of the south. This is very Revelation-esque speech, right? These are Revelation-esque words. The Lord of hosts shall defend them, and they shall devour and subdue with sling stones, and they shall drink and make a noise as through wine. They shall be filled like bowls, and as the corners of the altar. And the Lord their God shall save them in that day as the flock of his people, for they shall be as the stones of a crown, lifted up as an ensign upon his land, the stones of the crown of the king. For how great is his goodness, and how great is his beauty. Corn shall make the young men cheerful, and new wine the maids. So God will defend his people. There is a reason that the nation of Israel for 2,000 years didn't have a country to call home, yet they still exist as a nation. Every other people group, if you were to take my children, who I'm a first generation, I was born in Lebanon, but if you were to take my children and then their children and ask, are you Lebanese? And say, no, we're American. They would have lost their identity as Lebanese. But Israel, for 2,000 years nearly, never lost their identity. The Jew still knows that they're a Jew. They were set apart. They were a special case. And God says that not only is he going to preserve them, not only is he going to restore them, he's also going to protect them. He's the one who blows the trumpet. He's the one who defends them against their enemies. And once the people accept him, they will all greatly rejoice. So whenever you begin to see the signs of Israel being restored, know that the time is near. And we've already seen it, where Israel's been restored as a nation. The people are going back, and we're just looking for the next step. And as we were talking about, the prophecies of the Bible seem to be coming true right before our eyes. So the real question is, are you ready for the next step? Are you ready for the coming tribulation? I pray that everyone in this room will be raptured. Everyone that's hearing this online will be raptured, will be with Christ, because this is going to be a rough time on the world when all of these things come to pass. But you can rest assured, just like the first coming came to pass, this is going to come to pass as well. And we'll stop that chapter there.